Over decades, JRPGs have been defined by giants like Final Fantasy, Dragon Quest, and Persona. These series set the tone for what players expected from the genre. Sprawling narratives, turn-based combat, and stories that often crescendo from small-town struggles to world-shaking finales. But in recent years, indie developers have stepped into the space, not to replace the classics, but to reshape them, often with bold, experimental ideas. Indie JRPGs thrive on doing what big studios can't, or won't. They're free to experiment with mechanics, art styles, and themes that might be deemed too risky for a mainstream release. While they borrow inspiration from the greats, they also push against the boundaries of tradition. To understand this indie wave, let's look at 3 standouts examples: Undertale, Chained Echoes, and Clair Obscur Expedition 33. Each one shows a different facet of how indie creators are reimagining the JRPG. When Undertale was released in 2015, it was easy to underestimate. Its pixel graphics seemed like a throwback, and its indie origins suggested a modest, quirky RPG at best. But Undertale became a cultural phenomenon because it didn't just imitate JRPG conventions, it directly challenged them. The game's most radical idea was the choice between killing and sparing enemies. Traditional JRPGs encourage grinding through endless random encounters, turning monsters into stepping stones for leveling up. Undertale flipped that logic, making violence optional. Enemies could be befriended, consoled, or tricked into leaving peacefully, and the game remembered your choices, weaving them into the narrative in haunting ways. By doing this, Undertale transformed combat from a routine mechanic into a moral question. The player wasn't just battling monsters, they were deciding what kind of person they wanted to be in this world. That philosophical edge gave Undertale a weight that belied its playful exterior, proving that indie games could innovate not only in mechanics, but in storytelling ethics. If Undertale was the rebel, Chained Echoes is the homage. Developed almost entirely by a solo creator, Matthias Linda, the 22 release wears the inspirations proudly: Chrono Trigger, Final Fantasy VII, and Xenogears. Yet it doesn't settle for nostalgia. Instead, it refines the classic JRPG formula for a modern audience. The combat system, for example, introduces the overdrive mechanic, where players balance their actions to stay in the sweet spot of maximum efficiency. This keeps battles tense and strategic, avoiding the monotony of spamming attacks. The game also ditches random encounters and grinding, 2 staples of the genre that many modern players find tedious. Narratively, Chained Echoes delivers the sweeping character-driven epic fans of classics crave, but with tighter pacing and fewer filler moments. It respects the past while trimming its excesses. In that sense, Chained Echoes feels the bridge between JRPG tradition and indie innovation. It's proof that indie developers don't always need to subvert conventions. They can refine and polish them into something sharper. Where Chained Echoes celebrates tradition and Undertale dismantles it, Clair Obscur Expedition 33 pushes JRPGs into the realm of art house experimentation. Developed by Sandfall Interactive, this indie JRPG blends surrealist aesthetics, hybrid combat, and existential themes to create something unlike anything in the mainstream. At its core, Clair Obscur takes inspiration from turn-based combat, but adds real-time precision. Attacks and defenses demand perfect timing and positioning, giving battles a tactile intensity. It's a marriage of strategy and reflex that feels far removed from the classic pick an option and wait JRPG structure. But what really sets it apart is its atmosphere. Set in a dreamlike world where every year a mysterious entity called the Paintress awakens to erase an entire number from existence, the game's premise is as poetic as it is chilling. Expedition 33, the final expedition, represents humanity's last desperate attempt to break the cycle of annihilation. It's a story steeped in allegory, touching on themes of morality, cycles of history, and the fragility of human hope. Unlike many JRPGs that lean on anime tropes or familiar archetypes, Clarobscur feels closer to a surrealist painting come to life. Its narrative and aesthetic aren't trying to replicate the past. They're trying to carve out a new frontier for what a JRPG can look like and feel. What ties Undertale, Chained Echoes, and Clarobscur Expedition 33 together isn't their style or mechanics. They couldn't be more different. Their thread is freedom. Big studios making JRPGs are often boxed in tradition and commercial expectations. An indie developer, by contrast, can gamble everything on a strange mechanic, a risky theme, or a niche audience. Indie JRPGs thrive because they're not afraid to ask, what if? What if combat was about mercy instead of killing? What if we stripped down the bloated excess of old school JRPGs and polished them into something modern? What if a JRPG was less about nostalgia and more about creating a surreal, poetic experience? These games show that JRPGs aren't locked in the past. They can be funny, experimental, polished, or avant-garde, and often it's the indie scene, not the big franchises, that points that way forward. The rise of indie JRPGs doesn't mean the end of giants like Final Fantasy or Persona. Those games will always have their place with their massive budgets and cinematic storytelling. But indie JRPGs serve as a vital counterbalance. They remind us that the genre isn't just about tradition, it's about possibility. In a way, this mirrors the JRPG trope we talked about earlier, escalation. But instead of escalating from kings to gods, indie JRPGs escalate from homage to renovation. They show us that the future of the genre might not come from the biggest studios, but from the boldest experiments. Whether it's the moral choices of Undertale, the refined homage of Chained Echoes, or the surreal artistry of Clarobscur Expedition 33, indie JRPGs prove that the genre still has uncharted territory to explore. And for the players, that means the next great JRPG might not come from the household name. It might come from a small team with a big idea.